Good day and good morning. Let's resume our discussion of the Confessions Book 2 and Book 3, beginning specifically with the journey to adolescence. Uh, so, Augustine's Confessions inaugurates something philosophically unprecedented, an inward journey where lived experience itself becomes the site of metaphysical inquiry. Unlike Greek philosophy, which seeks truth by abstracting from the self, Augustine insists that truth must be sought through the self, in memory, in desire, and in confession. The human being is not first a rational spectator of the cosmos, but a restless heart embedded in time, in struggle, and in longing. Existentially, this opening frames adolescence not as a biological phase, but as a spiritual condition, one defined by disorientation, desire, and even misdirection of love. Augustine does not analyze sin from the outside phenomenologically, he relieves it from within, attending to how temptation appears attractive, how pleasure disguises itself as fulfillment, and how the self becomes divided against itself. With this inward method, no, reflexivity established, Augustine turns to the darkness of his very own adolescence as the first field of philosophical investigation. And there we see something else, the darkness of adolescence. Augustine's confession begins not with justification, but with interpretive remembrance. He does not recount his sins to relieve pleasure, but to understand the distance between what he loved and what was truly lovable. This marks a decisive philosophical move. Evil, in this sense, is not treated as an external force, but as a deformation of the will from within consciousness itself. Here, Augustine describes desire as a fog, an affective atmosphere that obscures discernment. The adolescent self does not experience lust as clearly evil. It feels like vitality, it feels like movement, it feels like aliveness. And Augustine's originality lies in showing how sin operates pre reflectively before moral reasoning can even interfere. A sort of bias, if you will, a sort of precondition, if you will. And the will, therefore, is captured before the intellect can even judge it. This inward confusion is intensified, of course, by the conflicting moral visions embodied by Augustine's parents. And we can see that, for example, in terms of his father's ambition. Here, Augustine introduces a relational philosophy of formation. The self is shaped not only by private choices, but by the desires of others projected unto it. His father celebrates sexual potency as success, while his mother fears for Augustine's soul. The child stands between rival conceptions of the good, different narratives, stories of the good, long before he can articulate one for himself. Augustine's philosophical contribution here is subtle but radical. Morality, as it seems, he says, is transmitted affectively, not intellectually, affectively, before it is understood conceptually. Shame, pride, fear, and aspiration precede ethical reasoning. Phenomenologically, Augustine experiences his body becoming meaningful to others before it becomes meaningful to himself. This is an early insight, an advanced insight even, into what later on we will call social embodiment. Social embodiment. And this conflict deepens even as Augustine enters a social world that is governed by peer desire rather than parental guidance. Parental guidance. And that's something we need to pay attention to also. Let's look at what this peer pressure is. No? As a young boy, of course, Augustine found himself uh, in the need to conform, no? Just like what we do when we are in the seminary, for example, that we need to conform to others, even if we don't agree with those others that we conform, no? Uh, Augustine exposes here a disturbing but very existential truth. What is this disturbing and existential truth? Sin often arises not from desire for pleasure, but from fear of exclusion. That fear of exclusion will play a very important role. He lies about imaginary transgressions, to imagine transgressions, to dream transgressions even. We try to make up transgressions ourselves, no? Imagine these transgressions ourselves, uh, or even pretend to have transgressions ourselves. Why? Because we wanted to other people to say that we are cool, for example, or that we are great because we were able to do things they can barely talk about or dream about. So here the lying about imaginary faults, transgressions to avoid the shame of innocence plays a very important role. Evil here is not enjoyment, but evil here is belonging. Augustine anticipates the modern accounts of bad faith where authenticity is sacrificed for social acceptance, um, just to belong. No? Augustine identifies the group as a powerful moral atmosphere. The self dissolves into collective desire and responsibility becomes diffused. His originality lies in recognizing that freedom is most endangered not by isolation, but freedom is most endangered by unexamined companionship, the desire to belong, the desire to be accepted even. Here, this dynamic of collective wrongdoing reaches its symbolic climax in the famous story of the theft of the pear tree. No? And that's a very, very famous story in Augustine. No? In fact, the the pear tree, this is a very interesting story because it's the crime without reason. The pear tree theft is Augustine's most profound philosophical case. There is no utility, no use, no pleasure in the object of the pear, no material gain even. The act is just pure negation, a willing of evil as evil. And Augustine tells us, for the first time, I desired it, not because it's good, not because it has a use, not because it's pleasurable, not because I needed to eat the pear. No, not because of any of this, but because of doing evil. Augustine thereby refutes any account of wrongdoing that reduces sin to mere ignorance, to mere miscalculation. Here, Augustine makes a decisive contribution to moral philosophy. Evil is not a substance, but evil is a perverse orientation of love, a wrong orientation of love. The will delights in transgression itself, in evil itself. Phenomenologically, the thrill lies in crossing a boundary, in doing something wrong, not in possessing what lies beyond it. Augustine now turns inward to analyze the structure of these perverse willing, of this wrong will, no? And here we see something very interesting, the psychology of sin. Augustine asks not what he did, but why it felt good. He didn't ask what he did, but he inquired on that feeling that satisfied him. His answer is rather devastating. The pleasure lay in shared guilt. Alone, the act would have been meaningless. Evil is intensified by communion, by a false unity that mirrors true friendship. And this marks Augustine's unique philosophical insight into intersubjectivity. Not all community is good. Not all communal life, pakikisama, is good. Some forms of togetherness dissolve responsibility and even seduces the will. Sin becomes a parody of love, binding persons together through negation rather than truth. From this insight, of course, Augustine expands his analysis to the inner logic of vice itself. What is this inner logic of vice? So, Augustine proposes a revolutionary moral ontology here. Every vice is a distorted imitation of God. Pride seeks transcendence, curiosity seeks knowledge, luxury seeks fullness. But each seeks these apart from their true source. Evil, therefore, Augustine tells us, is never creative. It is parasitic. I remember Maximilian Kolbe would always say, love alone creates. That's a very, very meaningful line. Love alone creates. Which means, if anything, love alone. Love alone creates. Uh, because evil is nothing else but parasitic. Uh, parasitic. These reframes the entire moral universe as something we have to pay attention to. Desire is never empty. It always reaches for being. It always reaches for truth. It always reaches for joy. And that's something we have to pay attention to. Augustine's originality uh, lies in showing that testifies, even sin testifies or points indirectly to God. The problem is not that we love too much, but the problem is that we love wrongly. This misdirected love, this wrongly directed love, propels Augustine into the restless intensity of Carthage. Book two basically moved around this very, very interesting dynamic of Augustine trying to clarify love. And that's something we need to pay attention to. And Carthage is basically book three, no? Book three, so is actually where he starts looking at Carthage, but it's still a very important part because he tries to deepen what he started in book two. Carthage appears as a landscape of excesses, illicit loves, sobra, noise, desire, stimulation. And Augustine's hunger in this sense is not primarily sexual but ontological. He longs to love and be loved, yet does not know what love is for. He becomes, in his very own words, in love with love, in love with love. This is a condition of interior famine masked by external abundance. Augustine's originality is to diagnose desire as a spiritual appetite. Without God as its object, love multiplies endlessly but satisfies nothing. This restless desire soon finds a powerful outlet. And what's a powerful outlet that you discover? The theater. The theater. Augustine's critique of the theater and its dangerous allure is not moralistic, but really something phenomenological. He asks why simulated suffering gives pleasure. His answer anticipates modern media theory. Emotional stimulation without responsibility produces addictive spectatorship. Augustine recognizes here a false compassion, one that enjoys feeling without acting. This is a profound philosophical insight. Emotions severed from truth and responsibility become self-indulgent. The self feeds on its own reactions rather than being transformed by reality. This hunger for meaning without discipline leads Augustine towards a false system of truth. No? Uh, they thought that they can simply go on and search for things just like that. And yet, it's not enough to do that. But because Augustine thought he can always do what he wants to do, then you see why he will fall among the Manichees. Augustine's attraction to Manichaeism is philosophical before it is actually religious. It promises explanation without humility, knowledge without conversion. Evil, in this sense, is also externalized, and therefore responsibility is displaced. The intellect is flattered, while the will remained untouched. Augustine's enduring contribution here is his recognition that false philosophies often succeed because they feel intellectually liberating. Phenomenologically, error presents itself as clarity. Only later does Augustine learn that truth requires not just understanding, but transformation of love, but a form of transformation that is out of love. It's not just a matter of understanding, knowing, if you will. It's not just like that. And this sets the stage for the long intellectual and spiritual captivity that will dominate the next phase of Augustine's life. And therefore, something that we also need to pay attention to. Here we see the wreckers. Augustine's account of the wreckers deepens his analysis of moral deformation through community. These students, which he called the wreckers, define themselves by cruelty, which is masked by sophistication or masked as culture, if you will. No? Their identity is purely performative. To belong is to humiliate others. Augustine recognizes something chillingly precise here. Evil is often theatrical, rehearsed, or even yet better, socially rewarded. Augustine experiences a split of consciousness. He abhors their actions, he doesn't like them, and yet he delights in their companionship. This tension reveals a uniquely Augustinian insight. Moral judgment can coexist with affective complicity. Knowing the good does not guarantee loving it. Knowing the good does not guarantee loving it. That is worth repeating. Philosophy, therefore, cannot remain at the level of cognition. It must address the formation of desire. It must go to how the heart is formed. From this environment of performative cruelty, Augustine turns towards intellectual ambition as a possible escape. And here he speaks of Cicero's Hortensius. Augustine's encounter with Cicero marks one of the most important moments in Western intellectual history. Philosophy awakens not as a system, but as eros for wisdom. Hortensius does not teach doctrines, it reorders Augustine's loves. This is a decisive shift from rhetoric as persuasion to philosophy as conversion. Augustine's originality lies in recognizing that philosophy is not neutral inquiry, but a reorientation of the soul. Truth is something to be desired, not merely demonstrated. Phenomenologically, Augustine experiences a new interior gravity here, a pull upward toward permanence, toward wisdom, toward immortality. For the first time, his longing finds a name. Yet, this awakening is incomplete precisely because Augustine's pride still governs how truth is recognized. That's the reason why Augustine, while still talking about the Hortensius, and take note, the Hortensius is a missing text. We don't know the contents of the Hortensius. And even though he already saw the possibility of truth within philosophy, there's still a rejection of scriptures. Augustine's rejection of scripture reveals a profound philosophical blind spot. He mistakes rhetorical elegance for truth. And he thought that rhetorical elegance is truth also. No? When in fact, they're two totally different things. Saying things beautifully doesn't mean you're saying the truth. Speaking well, in a highfalutin manner doesn't mean you're really talking about the truth. These are just two totally different, opposite perspectives. And we need to recognize that too. Okay? And we need to pay attention at that also. So the Bible here appears crude, basic even for him. No, the Bible appears unelegant even. No, when they look at the Bible, he thinks napakasimple, wala man lang lalim, di ba? And therefore does not flatter the ego. Augustine confesses, therefore, that he was unwilling to become a little beginner. which is a devastating diagnosis of intellectual pride. This is a failure of perception for Augustine. Augustine cannot see inward depth because he is captivated by surface brilliance. By surface brilliance. His unique contribution is to show that humility is not opposed to reason, but is a condition for understanding. Truth requires a posture of receptivity, not a posture of dominance. This pride makes Augustine vulnerable to systems that promise mastery without submission. And that's why you can see how it was easy for him to be seduced by Manichaean promises. Manichaeism appeals to Augustine because it mimics Christian language while emptying it of existential demand. Walang hinihingi. It offers explanations without repentance, cosmology without conversion. Augustine later recognizes these as a counterfeit transcendence. Peke. Philosophically, Augustine identifies a perennial danger here. Language can simulate truth, kayang gayahin ng wika ang katotohanan, while bypassing reality nang hindi nagiging totoo. Augustine is moved by speech that sounds profound but fails to nourish the soul. This insight anticipates later critiques of ideology and abstraction detached from lived truth. The emptiness of these promises becomes increasingly evident as Augustine tries to probe the Manichaean foundations. Sinubukan niyang silipin ano ba yung laman, lalim nung Manichaean foundations. Augustine now critiques Manichaeanism through a proto phenomenology of proto phenomenology of imagination. Okay? Its myths resemble dreams, vivid, coherent, and yet utterly non-nourishing. Vivid, coherent, and utterly non-nourishing. They captivate the senses, but they leave the intellect starved. This is a crucial philosophical advance. Augustine distinguishes between representation and reality, between mental images and being itself. His insight that God cannot be an object among objects lays the groundwork for later metaphysics of transcendence. Evil here, in this sense, is not merely false belief. Evil is actually misplaced imagination. Misplaced imagination. These imaginative distortions basically give rise to increasingly troubling philosophical questions. And here you see questions that are without answers. The Manichees disturb Augustine with questions they themselves cannot answer. Where does evil come from? Is God corporeal? And Augustine admits uh, his confusion about this matter is just remarkable. He thought he was advancing towards truth, but in reality, he was actually moving away from it. Augustine, Augustine's originality emerges here in retrospect. Evil is not a privation of good. Or sorry, evil is not a substance, but evil is a privation of good. That's supposedly what it is. It's the privation of good. These insights will be foundational in for Western metaphysics. Augustine learns that confusion can feel like progress, and certainty can conceal error. This misunderstanding extends into Augustine's conception of justice himself, or justice itself. Augustine confronts moral relativism by articulating a layered account of law. Customs change, but justice does not. What varies historically is the application, not the principle. This is a decisive philosophical move beyond both relativism and legalism. Existentially, Augustine recognizes that moral judgment requires formation, not instinct. Phenomenologically, he exposes the error of projecting one's own moral horizon unto all of history. His insight preserves moral absolutes while respecting temporal difference. From this foundation, Augustine identifies the universal core of moral law. Augustine distills ethics into this simple principle: love God and neighbor. This is not sentimentalism, but metaphysical clarity. Love names the proper orientation of the will towards reality itself. Love names the proper orientation of the will toward reality itself. His philosophical contribution is profound here. Morality is not rule following, but morality is a rightly ordered love. Ordo amoris. Phenomenologically, Augustine recognizes that every act already expresses love. What matters now is what is loved and how. Misordered love, however, manifests concretely even in destructive actions, no? In very destructive actions for that matter. That's why he says there's a hierarchy of love, and we have to pay attention at this hierarchy. Augustine constructs, therefore, a moral psychology rooted in desire rather than behavior alone. Harmful acts arise from deeper lusts. Lusts for domination, lusts for spectacle, lusts for pleasure. Sin, therefore, is thus not only accidental, but sin is very much structured in this sense. Not just accidental, but also very structured. This anticipates later existential and even psychoanalytic accounts of motivation. Augustine's originality lies in integrating moral law with interior analysis. Punishment is not divine revenge. It is the self-inflicted consequence of disordered love. These insights are very important because they eventually expose the absurdity of Manichaean cosmology. So until this point, no, he was really a Manichaean of sort, no, and he's proud to be Manichaean without actually recognizing the the informality, the errors of the Manichaean system. And this is where we will see also the unique movement in Augustine. Because here we will see the absurdity of Manichaean beliefs. Augustine now views his former beliefs with tragic clarity. The image of figs weeping exposes the incoherence of attributing moral drama to matter while denying moral responsibility to persons. Philosophically, Augustine recognizes that systems which evaluate human agency inevitably become absurd. Phenomenologically, he experiences shame not merely for believing falsehoods, but for having loved them. Truth, he learns, must illuminate reality, not escape it. So even if as Augustine remained trapped intellectually, another force happens. And that's Monica's vision. So now we're talking about two trees, the pear tree, the fig tree. But now let's look at Monica's vision. Monica's tears introduced a counter philosophy here. Hope grounded not in argument, but in fidelity. Here, Augustine acknowledges something crucial. Truth can work through persons even when reason resists it. Existentially, of course, Monica embodies a love that does not control, but a love that trusts. Augustine's encounters faith as an endurance rather than explanation. And this challenges his intellectualism at its root. This challenge becomes explicit in Monica's interpretation of her own vision. Augustine tries to dominate the meaning of the vision, bending it to his own position even, and Monica refuses. Her clarity is not argumentative, her clarity is perceptive. She sees what Augustine cannot because she is not defending an identity. Augustine's philosophical insight is striking. Truth is often clearer to those less invested in self-justification. Phenomenologically, humility sharpens vision. Pride distorts even revelation. Nevertheless, Augustine remains in darkness longer than he expects. In fact, we know what he calls the 9 years in darkness. Augustine describes error 9 years, huh? By if you enter the seminary at the first year, in olden times, you would be a priest in less than 9 years. Uh, Augustine describes error not as static ignorance, but as cyclical entrapment. Efforts to escape only deepen the mire. This is one of his most existentially powerful images, yung pagtakbo. His originality lies in recognizing that time itself can become oppressive when the will is misdirected. Repetition without transformation produces despair. Conversion cannot be forced by effort alone. Wisdom, however, waits patiently for readiness. Wisdom waits patiently until he's ready. The bishop refuses to argue. This restraint is philosophically profound, very profound even. Truth cannot be imposed on a will still intoxicated by novelty. Augustine later understands this is a pedagogical type of mercy. The bishop respects the timing of conversion. Learning requires not just exposure, learning requires exhaustion. When false pleasures lose their charm. And this wisdom culminates in a prophetic reassurance. And here we see the son of many tears. The bishop's words crystallize Augustine's journey. Salvation is not earned, but is awaited. Monica's tears become a form of prayer that precedes Augustine's understanding. Augustine's unique contribution here is to integrate grace into a philosophical anthropology. The self is not self-saving. Phenomenologically, hope can exist before clarity, sustaining the soul until truth becomes visible. With these promise lingering, Augustine's intellectual journey will soon intersect with profound personal laws, forcing his philosophy to confront mortality itself. In book 4, no? So now we're in book 4, we see the deepening uh of Augustine as a Manichae and as an astrologer. Here we see a deepening rather than a resolution of Augustine's crisis. Outwardly, his life stabilizes, he teaches rhetoric, gains reputation, and inhabits the role of a cultured intellectual. Inwardly, however, he describes a condition of duplicity, being deceived and deceiving. This duality becomes central to Augustine's philosophical anthropology. The divided self is not accidental but structural when love is misordered. Augustine experiences his life as fragmented into incompatible roles. Public success and private superstition coexist without harmony. His originality lies in identifying hypocrisy not as conscious lying, but as live. Just a minute, please. Sorry for that. So as I was saying, he describes his condition here as a condition of duplicity, where the self is divided, and its division is not accidental but structural, precisely because love is disordered. Here, the fragmented life is basically brought about by his public success, and at the same time, something that doesn't cohere with his private superstition. His originality, therefore, lies in identifying hypocrisy not as conscious lying, but as living without interior unity. The self becomes a performance rather than a dwelling. This divided existence plays out most clearly in Augustine's profession as a teacher of rhetoric. And here we see teaching rhetoric, or the role of teaching rhetoric. Augustine's relationship to rhetoric reveals a crucial tension between technique and truth. He sells eloquence as a means of domination, yet insists on ethical limits in its use. This ambivalence shows that conscience has not disappeared, it has merely lost authority. Existentially, Augustine stands on a slippery ground here, sensing the instability of a life devoted to persuasion rather than a life grounded in wisdom. Rhetorically, this becomes a substitute for truth. Words produce effects, but their effects are without reference to reality. Augustine's contribution here is to anticipate later critiques of instrumental reason. Skill severed from meaning corrodes the soul. This instability extends into Augustine's most intimate human relationships. And we speak of his unmarried partnership. Augustine's long-term relationship reveals his capacity for genuine attachment. Even amid moral confusion, his faithfulness, or he's faithful, affectionate, even emotionally invested. Yet he insists on distinguishing between love ordered toward shared life and love ordered toward pleasure. Philosophically, Augustine introduces here a nuanced account of relational intention. The same affective bond can carry different ontological meanings depending on its orientation. Augustine therefore learns that love cannot be reduced to intensity. It must be reordered toward permanence and openness to life. So even as Augustine rejects certain superstitions, his understanding of God remains distorted. Here we see a rejection of divination in time. Augustine's refusal to kill a fly for success appears morally admirable, yet he confesses it lacked true virtue. His rejection of divination was not grounded in love of God, but in a vague intuition of dignity. This moment reveals a subtle Augustinian insight. Correct action without correct orientation does not heal the soul. Augustine experiences moral gestures that feel hollow. Philosophy must address not only what we do, but why we do it. Despite this resistance, though, Augustine remains entangled in astrology. Mahilig sa horoscope. Astrology tempts Augustine because it absolves him of responsibility. And that's the problem with astrology. If the stars determine action, the self is innocent, can only be innocent, in fact, can only be innocent. Augustine later recognizes these as a metaphysical evasion of guilt. His philosophical breakthrough lies in linking freedom to justice. A universe without responsibility is morally meaningless. Augustine exposes the comfort of fatalism. It removes anxiety at the cost of truth. A voice of lived wisdom now intervenes to change this illusion. The proconsul's council represents a different kind of authority, practical, experienced, and disillusioned with pretension. He does not argue metaphysics, he testifies from discernment. Augustine's originality is to acknowledge the epistemic value of moral credibility. Truth appears not as brilliance, but as sobriety. This encounter loosens astrology's hold on Augustine's imagination. The proconsul's explanation reframes coincidence itself. And here we see the power of chance. Chance, the proconsul suggests, can produce apparent meaning without intentional design. This insight undermines astrology's claim to necessity. Augustine learns to distinguish significance from causation. Phenomenologically, the soul seeks patterns even where none exist. And this prepares Augustine for a more mature understanding of providence, one that preserves freedom without surrendering meaning. This intellectual clarification soon collides with the overwhelming emotional catastrophe, the death of a friend. The death of Augustine's friend shatters his interior world. This friendship had become a surrogate foundation, something absolute in a finite being. Its loss reveals the fragility of love when it is not grounded in permanence. Here, Augustine encounters mortality not as an abstract fact, but as a personal annihilation. Grief transforms the world itself. Familiar places becomes unbearable. And Augustine's originality lies in treating grief as a philosophical event that exposes the soul's deepest attachments. The meaning of his loss intensifies when Augustine recalls his role in his friend's spiritual confusion. Augustine's friend returns from illness changed, aligned with the faith Augustine once mocked. The reversal destabilizes Augustine's assumed authority. When the friend dies shortly after, Augustine confronts not only laws, but judgment. Augustine faces the limits of intellectual influence. He has shaped his friend's belief, but could not secure his destiny. Irony becomes tragic. What Augustine dismissed becomes salvific. Grief now consumes Augustine entirely. Augustine describes grief as a total saturation. Everything he sees becomes death. The world loses its intelligibility. This is not sadness, but an ontological collapse. His philosophical contribution is profound. Meaning is just relational. Kahulugan. Ka, relational dimension. When the object of love disappears, kung saan nahuhulog lahat ng bagay, the world itself disintegrates. Augustine becomes a problem to himself. Selfhood without anchoring love becomes unbearable. Yet grief itself contains a disturbing sweetness. And that's why he speaks of the sweetness of tears. Augustine reflects on the paradox of grief's pleasure. Tears do not restore what was lost, yet they comfort. This ambiguity unsettles him. Augustine identifies mourning as a self-reflexive experience. The soul delights in expressing its pain, and philosophically begins to suspect that grief reveals the soul's misplacement of ultimate joy. Consolation without hope just cannot heal. This realization sharpens Augustine's understanding of misery. Misery, Augustine concludes, is the condition of loving mortal things as though they were immortal. Loss merely reveals what was already true. This insight is central to Augustine's philosophy. Suffering does not create disorder, it exposes it. Augustine experiences fear of death as fear of total loss because his love has had no transcendent anchor. These this insight leads to Augustine's most famous formulations on friendship. One soul in two bodies. Augustine's claim that he and his friends were one soul in two bodies expresses both the beauty but also the danger of human love. The self had extended itself beyond itself. Here, Augustine identifies a category error. Finite beings cannot bear infinite weight. The self fractures when what it has become dependent has become when it has become dependent or vanishes. The consequence of this fracture are existentially devastating. Nothing consoles Augustine. Pleasure, beauty, learning, they all repel him. The world becomes uninhabitable. And this anticipates Augustine's most famous insight. Restlessness is not psychological, but ontological. Phenomenologically, the soul cannot settle where it does not belong. Disordered love produces homelessness. The only response left is to run away. Flight. Augustine flees not toward healing, but away from unbearable presence. Movement replaces reflection. Philosophically, this reveals the final insufficiency of destruction. The self cannot outrun itself. And Augustine's later conversion will depend on his hard earned realization that rest is not found by relocation, but by a reorientation to love, but to a reorientation to love. As the lecture comes to a close, Augustine leaves us not with answers, not with answers that are neatly resolved, but with a self laid bare, restless, divided, wounded by its own loves. And what Augustine has given philosophy is not a doctrine first, but a method. The courage to turn inward without evasion. By narrating desire, shame, friendship, grief, and failure from the inside, he invents a phenomenology of soul centuries before the term even exists. Human life, he shows, is not primarily a problem to be solved, but a drama to be understood. Augustine teaches us that we are not defined by what we think, but by what we love. Every action, every attachment, every grief reveals an order of love already at work within us. Sin is not an absence of desire, but its misdirection. Misery is not punishment. It's not a punishment imposed, but an interior consequence of loving what cannot last as though it were eternal. The loss of Augustine's friend exposes this truth. Life became a question magno. When finite loves are treated as ultimate, the self fractures when they disappear. Augustine's great discovery is that restlessness is the soul's most honest signal. It is not a defect to be eradicated, but a sign that the heart has not yet found its proper home. Pleasure, success, companionship, knowledge, and even virtue fail to satisfy when they are made to bear the weight of ultimate meaning. The self becomes homeless, not because it loves too much, but because it loves without measure or orientation. And so Augustine's journey in this book ends not in conversion, but in exposure. He has not yet found rest, but he has discovered why he cannot find it where he is looking. This is his enduring philosophical gift. The recognition that truth is not merely something we grasp, but something that must receive us until love is reoriented toward what does not perish. The soul will remain divided, in motion, and unresolved. In Augustine, in these books, philosophy learns to confess. And in that confession, the modern interior self is born, aching, honest, and still on its way home. Thank you very much for listening.